It takes a lot more than great prices to make a great sale. Imported fabric on handcrafted rattan. Some people wait a whole year.
You always save me money. This week, Canadian Tire saved me $50 on the Moon Gravity Rebounder. It was just $79.95. So now, I get into shape right here in my own living room. Or even the kitchen.
There's a lot more to Canadian Tire for a lot less.
The Honda motorcycle.
So you're industry, trade, commerce. So you're countervailing duties, that's what you are. Yes, you. God, but you must be terribly concerned with the fact that we'll go down the bloody tube if they put a country.
But they're brand new and have the full Honda warranty. Lowest sacrifice prices. Yours on a first-come basis. The Honda Freight Damage Sale conducted by Allied Motorcycles. One location only. Fuller Glass Building, King George Highway across from the Dell Shopping Center.
BCTV.
Good morning. I think it's fair to say that every capital L Liberal in the country is drooling with delight at poor Joe in Winnipeg. Joe, of course, the knives in his back only hurt when he laughs. And they're going to go through this caper tonight, and he'll be endorsed to some extent, I do suppose. And then the Liberals will pull a fasty. And once they've got Joe insecurely in as leader of the Conservative Party, the scenario, some people say, is that Pierre will walk away elegantly. They will bring in the ineffable, elegant John Turner, who will face Joe in the next election, and the Liberals will, of course, as a matter of right, the natural governing party, be re-elected. That's one scenario. Now, one reason I said that was just by happenstance, sitting in my studio this morning, is a man who may be drooling with delight over Joe's problems. He is Ed Lumley, the Minister of Industry, Trade and Commerce, and that very useful weapon, regional grants, Director of Regional Economic Expansion. He's the guy who's was having the trouble with the Japanese on the auto quotas. Now, also here this morning is one of these decent people, one of these good people. He's on the Missile Cruise Conversion Project, or what's that effect. And I have quite solid information that the anti-cruise people have lost their battle, and that the agreement with the United States to use Canada as a testing ground will be signed quite shortly. Then this morning, believe it or not, on the square old Webster program, we're turning to the topic of sex. Every time you listen or watch a program, it's about pornography or eroticism or pay TV, whichever comes first, and this time it's more sex. This time from an evangelical Christian couple. That's going to be interesting. Now, first off the top this morning, Ed Lumley and the problems facing British Columbia, which his government may or may not be able to correct. After the break. Mr. Lumley, were you as disappointed as commentators in the East seem to be that your Mr. Trudeau, our knight in shining armour, came back with an empty order book and achieved nothing practical in our trade relations with the all-powerful Japanese?
Well, Jack is the individual who made a recommendation to the Prime Minister over 2 years ago to make this as one of his priority trips when I was Trade Minister. I wasn't disappointed at all. As a matter of fact, I was very happy that he undertook it, and talking to the businessmen who traveled with him since that time, they were very happy with the trip, and I think we're going to see substantial economic benefits to Canada as a result of the Prime Minister's trip.
Before we talk about the auto pact, no, let's do the auto trade with the Japanese now. As International Trade Minister, you were the guy who put the 10,000 miles of red tape round the cars on the Surrey Delta docks here and put the Japanese bureaucrats through. Did that do us damage or do us good? This was to cut down their importation.
Well, Jack, I think it did us good. First of all, the automobile industry is a very important industry in Canada. It happens to be the largest purchaser of steel, textiles. A substantial number of industries across Canada are dependent on the growth of the automobile industry. So it bought us some time, I think, to adjust. There's some structural problems within that industry. Secondly, I don't think it hurt us with the Japanese whatsoever, contrary to a lot of commentaries.
Do they understand this kind of hard-nosed behavior?
Well, they have over 25% of the market in Canada, Jack, over 50% here in British Columbia. In England, they're only allowed 3%, in France, 2%, in Germany, 10%. So I think that they understand that those kind of negotiations.
Our trade balance with Japan is so much in our favor, it would be very difficult for us to put them down at 3%, wouldn't it?
Exactly, and that we didn't ask for that. We were asking almost for the same thing as the United States has received in 1980, and that's why I couldn't understand the Japanese reluctance to do that at the time.
What percentage was that? I forget.
It was 20% at the time.
20%. Now we've been told, according to reports, that no decision will be made on the Canadian quota until they've hammered out the deal with the United States.
I think it's highly unlikely that the Japanese will deal with Canada until they resolve the issue with the United States, because 90% of the North American market for them is the U.S., and as good business people that they are, they're going to take care of their biggest customer first.
Now, what about the crunch on March the 7th? I had one Tory aspirant who'd never heard of countervailing duties. His name was Peter Pocklington, but I don't have to brief you on countervailing duties, do I?
No, Jack, you certainly don't, and of course the importance of the forest products industry to Canada. It's our largest industry, our largest employer, our largest foreign earner. And of course I was responsible for the negotiations in the previous US ITC hearings, which we were successful at. And these are obviously more difficult, but I'm still confident that the American administration will see that it's in our best interest, North Americans' best interest, not to discriminate against Canada.
Just a little paragraph of background. That being the threat by the United States softwood industry, who are now dealing with their ITC, and if we're regarded as unfair competitors, they can arbitrarily and bureaucratically put an extra duty on Canadian lumber. And I'm told by our big boys and our big unions here that even $5 a thousand on exported lumber or $10 a thousand would very nearly bankrupt the lumber industry in BC. Do you agree with these dire forebodings?
Well, if the U.S. brings countervail duty in the way they're talking about it, and the way the industry would like, there's no question about it. That'd be very, very serious for the Canadian economy, and in particular British Columbia. But when I made representations to Secretary Brock and Secretary Baldridge, I think we realized that what we should start to do is talk more about North American share of the world market. Instead of fighting with each other, let's see what we can do on an international basis, and hopefully the talks will go around that way. But there is no question about it. Tremendous protectionist pressure in the U.S. Congress these days.
I'm told there's almost a 90% chance that on March the 7th, some kind of countervailing duty will be applied. Am I being fed just deliberately gloomy information to cause panic?
I don't think anybody knows that yet, Jack. If you recall last year, when last time I appeared on your show, the first issue within the United States Trade Commission was before us, and the dire consequences were forecast at that time. As it turned out, they could found no evidence of subsidy whatsoever. So I'm an optimistic person, and I think that common sense will prevail in these negotiations. But
it's a bureaucratic decision being made. It's not a political decision being made on March the 7th as an interim measure.
Well, right now, but still the final decision as to whether countervail is applied is made at the political level, not made at the bureaucratic level.
What did you tell Brock? Can you tell me what you told Brock?
Sure, I'll tell you very honestly. As I've said to Brock, to Baldridge, I've said to the President, I said to the Secretary of Treasury, I think it's about time we stop fighting amongst ourselves and started to concentrate on the North American share of the world market, which has declined substantially in the past 15 years. And that we shouldn't be putting up tariffs and trade restrictions between our two countries. We should take advantage of the integration of the private sector within North America and try and improve the job situation by getting a bigger share of the world.
Now, our local social credit politicians are trying to cheer us up with the fact that the National Energy Board has changed its export policy. Was that part of your negotiations? I'm talking about the potential establishment of the big LNG plant at Rupert by Dome. Is that really going to go ahead, or is that merely more potential jobs as propaganda for the moment?
No, I think it's a tremendous potential for British Columbia. My responsibility is to maximize the industrial offsets from these developments here in British Columbia. And we were very happy yesterday to see the National Energy Board found that there was surplus to Canadian needs, and with respect to gas exports to Japan and the United States, And now it'll be up to our officials with the Dome people to try and ensure that we maximize the benefits here in our own shore.
If they applied countervailing duties, can we retaliate? Would we retaliate? Are we prepared to retaliate? Or is the auto industry much bigger than the lumber industry and you wouldn't touch it?
Well, remember, the lumber industry, Jack, is the biggest industry in Canada. Forest products, pulp and paper industry is the biggest industry in Canada.
But the auto industry is in the east.
The lumber industry is in all 10 provinces.
You wouldn't retaliate?
I never deal with hypothetical questions, Jack. You know that.
Well, one of our political leaders here said we'd cut off their gas, we'd cut off their water, we'd cut off almost everything they had. That was kind of undiplomatic.
Well, hopefully we won't have to resort to those kind of measures, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it.
I took a cheap shot at Joe this morning and the Liberals. And of course there was a measure of truth in what I said, that nothing gives you greater comfort than to see the Tory convention in such apparent disarray prior to the vote tonight. Happy about it.
Jack, to be perfectly honest, I'll just speak for myself. I think our preoccupation with improving the economy is by far preoccupies most of our time, and what happens in Winnipeg tonight really is not going to alter what we're going to do tomorrow and the next day. Our preoccupation is jobs, and what happens tonight is not going to change that one iota.
Seen Judy Arola lately?
She sits 2 seats from me, Jack. I see her 5 days a week.
Where is her foot? Is it in her mouth or on the floor?
You know, Judy Arola is, I think she's done a tremendous amount for the women of this country. She's right here in your own province, Minister of Mines. Boy, just ask the mining people what she thinks of Judy Arola and the role she's played. And, you know, every once in a while things get twisted and turned. And what
That's right. It's
these
this damn
politicians
media.
say.
They're always twisting
No,
and
I didn't
turning
say, I didn't say the media. I didn't say that, Jack.
No. More with Ed Lumley and your calls too after the break. Jack Monroe was telling me he was down in Ottawa for some new task force. What are you up to now? And do you think these task forces can do any good for the vast numbers of unemployed this year in BC?
Jack, I've initiated at the present time 3 task forces, one on forest products, pulp and paper, one on aerospace, and one on automotives, 3 of our most important industries. And first of all, it gets business and government and labor at the table to collectively recommend what, you know, on an action-based plan, what we all have to do to ensure the economic viability of the various sectors. So that is extremely important. In other words, you're bringing in the experts, not somebody in Ottawa trying to decide how we should ensure the viability of the forest products industry in British Columbia. So It's coming from the industry itself. We've asked them to come back with a report in 4 to 6 months. Ian Barclay has agreed to co-chair this along with Jim Buchanan from the CPU, and of course, you know, Jack Monroe has been a very valuable member of the Export Trade Development Board, and the importance of the forest products, pulp and paper industry is second to none in this country, and so I'm looking forward to some very positive results, which will result in job creation in Canada in the very near term.
Well, now you're the Director of Regional and Economic Expansion, which traditionally in the past, and I could probably turn it up in the Auditor General's report, seems to concentrate all of its major activities in the eastern Canada.
Yes.
Now that was all right in the good old days, you know, when we were prosperous and they weren't. Are you going to make any extra effort for DRI projects in British Columbia? Have you any plans for more DRI projects? You know, we've got 27% unemployment in places like Kamloops, and there's a disastrous effect.
Jack,
what can DRI do for us? But maybe you've got no money anyway with your $24 billion deficit.
No, first of all, as you know, on December 22nd, we decided to designate the Port Alberni area for ILAP assistance, which was the first Western community designated for that regional development program. But right now, and within the next 3 weeks, I hope to present a paper to my cabinet colleagues for the first time, a very comprehensive regional development program which will be based on a formula wherever unemployment drops below a certain level or disposable income, sort of a formula we're going to devise that you won't have to wait a long time to get in and get some federal assistance, that you'll automatically, by a trigger mechanism, be designated for federal assistance.
Well, we had Axworthy here the other day announcing the NEED program, which I think potentially gave about 8,000 jobs. But that's not enough. Maybe now's the time for massive public spending, regardless of the economists, regardless of the deficit, to get people through this winter.
Well, more and more even of the senior corporate executives are recommending that to Mark Lalone as he travels across the country on the pre-budget consultations. As you know, business has always sort of been preoccupied with that deficit figure, but now they're starting to relax that posture.
Politically, though, apart from the cheap shots I take at the Tories and at you are in a bad way. The Liberal Party is at its lowest ebb, probably in its history, certainly post-war history. That's pretty obvious, is it not, Mr. Lumley?
I don't know of a government, Jack, in the Western world today that's not in trouble with the economic situation, and I think I can certainly understand the frustrations of the people. They obviously hold their politicians responsible for the situation, and if it were not thus, then I think that would show they really didn't care. So I think it's understandable.
Yeah, and you have a particular problem, you know, because the lack of popularity of your leader, who once time was our great charismatic hero. It's just funny how he's gone down the tube in the public eye, isn't it?
Well, I think it's most unfortunate that one man can be blamed for so many ill wills that are created all around the world, but I think we're pretty happy to have a man of Mr. Trudeau's stature heading this country.
Yeah, maybe we are, maybe we aren't, but the ordinary people think, goodness gracious me, these politicians are all the same. What happens to Pitfield? What happens to Stewart? They all finish up with fabulous jobs with incredibly obscene pension rights.
Jack,
don't you think that's where you lose your public support?
There are many things that causes a loss of public support, but look at the criticism, as you said in your opening comments, of the Prime Minister's trip. It was like he was on a vacation, a joyride. You know, for 18 hours a day, he's working on improving trade relations, and for an hour a day, he set some time aside for himself, and that's the part that everybody focused on. So I can't control that, Jack.
Yeah, it's funny. 10 years ago, he could have done what he liked, and he would have been just perfectly received by the media. This time, the media were obviously out to get him, weren't they?
Well, I was on the trip, Jack, and I would never want to prejudge the media in that regard.
Oh, it really is time that Turner took over, isn't it?
I think I'm very happy with our present leadership, and John Turner happens to be the man who brought me into politics, Jack. But
careful now.
Regardless of who the leader is in this country, the major policies are not going to be changed.
Well, I certainly wish you well in your countervailing duties and your battles for trade. You know, nobody's that partisan that they want to see you in trouble. But let's take one segment of phone calls, just on your opinion of the Liberals. Because after all, Ed Lumley is from the East. Your constituency again?
Stormont Dundas, Cornwall.
Cornwall,
Ontario.
A man from Cornwall, no. After the break. I had forgotten, if you'll forgive me, Mr. Lumley, that trade went into external affairs.
Yes, sir.
And you now take DRE.
DRE and the industry side of the old industry trading commerce now being merged together.
Now, DRE, as I said before, has been accused of many bad handlings. And your department gave $2.7 million to a company just a couple of days before it went bankrupt, according to Kenneth Dye's report.
Yes.
Will you get that $2.7 million back?
Yes, we will. As a matter of fact, we undertook those negotiations. It was a company in the East. We undertook those negotiations with the bank, and the bank never bothered to tell us that they were going to pull the plug all the time during negotiations, and suddenly we found ourselves making this offer, and the bank pulled the plug. We've now found an alternative buyer for that company, and we're confident that we're going to recover all the money.
Trust companies. Do you have faith in trust companies in this country today, Mr. Lumley, or if you had any money on an RSP in a trust company, would you take it out?
I guess it depends on the trust company, Jack.
Do you think it does?
I think it's...
You see what happened in Vancouver yesterday?
No, I
The
didn't.
biggest office building ever conceived and halfway up in Vancouver, in which the Crown Trust were involved, has been frozen and all work stopped because of the action by the Ontario government and the approval by the other governments too. This indicates really something very serious in our financial structure and is liable to make one fearful of all trust companies. Unfair?
I think it's unfair. I mean, obviously that's not my field of expertise, but I don't think you can tar the whole industry and tar some companies who've developed a fairly substantial reputation over the years because of alleged illegalities or wrongdoings by a few companies.
By three companies. Well, I agree on that. Yeah. But it makes the normal person nervous, does it not?
Well, I think you're obviously going to get concerned if you have your money in...
Any bright calls? Go ahead to Ed Lumley.
Yeah, good morning, Mr. Lumley. You say we have a trade surplus with Japan. that surplus is created by us selling them raw materials, right?
Right.
Primarily?
Pardon?
Yes, primarily. About 97% of what we sell Japan is not included in the end product category, the fully manufactured category, which Japan sells us.
Why are we sitting on our duffs and not creating more manufacturing in this country? We have the raw materials, and we have the people to do it, plus we have the brains, supposedly, and yet here we are just selling off our raw materials and not making anything out of them. And Japan depends totally on other people's raw materials, and they manufacture everything.
We've got the message. What's the answer, if there is one?
No, I think it's a very valid criticism, but first of all, the image you allege that we're sort of the hewers of wood, drawers of water is not accurate. Over 70% of the total goods that we sell abroad are in some form of manufacturing. Obviously, we like to have that 100%, but I don't think that's realistic.
70% of what we sell abroad is in manufacturing?
70% of what we export abroad is in some form of manufacturing. For example, even what we sell in Japan, over 40% is past the raw material stage of the total volume of goods that we sell in Japan.
Past the raw material, but I mean, we manufacture just very little of that, and then then they finish manufacturing and sell it back to us.
Well, let me give you a good example. In your aluminum industry, in the last couple of years, you're now further processing aluminum, doing the ingots now here in British Columbia for Japan, whereas 3 or 4 years ago, they were all done right in Japan itself.
Fair enough, but I had Lester Thurow of MIT here the other day describing rather derisively as it was a toss-up among international economists whether Belgium or Canada were at the bottom of the heap.
It's funny, Jack, the United States of America, which he's a citizen, had a massive trade surplus for the last 5 years in a row, and Canada's the only major industrialized nation that's had a trade surplus for the same period of time, so I think Mr. Thurow should look at his own country rather than looking at Canada.
Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Mr. Webster and Mr. Lumley.
Yes.
This morning on an 8 o'clock news broadcast, I heard that the Chrysler plant in Windsor is being dismantled and sent to St. Louis. Now, isn't it true that Canada subsidized this plant in Windsor?
First of all, the agreement that the government of Canada worked out with Chrysler Corporation, not 1 cent has changed hands at the present time. The Van Wagon operation is going to be produced in the Windsor plant, and the rear-wheel drives, like the Chrysler New Yorker, is going to be phased out because they're both produced in the same building. And Chrysler now has decided to extend that production, and they couldn't find a plant in Canada that was big enough to handle the anticipated volume of business, and so they decided to put it in St. Louis. But just the rear-wheel drive is moving out, but the new product, the Van Wagon, will be moved in.
Moved into Canada?
Moved into Canada.
You haven't given them any of that?
In fact, we have a world product mandate, Jack, for that Van Wagon, which is a new series of cars.
Didn't you guarantee Chrysler for $800 million or something?
We did under the old agreement to guarantee Chrysler for approximately $225 million. Those negotiations are ongoing right now.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr.
Go ahead from Courtney to Ed Lumley.
Yeah, good morning. Could you ask Mr. Lumley why we haven't entertained the idea of free trade in this country? It'll give everybody at least a 25% decrease in the cost of living.
I'm sorry, Jack, I missed the question.
He's asking, why are we not a free trading nation? I thought we were to a point.
Well, we are a free trade nation. There's only one other industrialized nation in the world that has the same percentage of GNP and exports as Canada.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, please.
Jack, am I on?
Yes, you are.
You asked us to give our opinion of the present Liberal government and the Liberal Party.
Yes, please.
I'm afraid I can't give you mine because all the bells in the studio would start ringing if I gave it to you. However, I do feel that if they have the brains they pretend to have, they would be well advised to nominate your present guest as their next leader rather than Mr. Turner or someone else. If they did that, the Conservatives would really be worried.
I think he's sincere.
I really appreciate the comment, but
well,
I'm very
thank
happy
you for not using. Thank you for not using obscene language, caller.
All right, Jack.
From Princeton, go ahead, please.
Yes. Good morning, Mr. Webster.
Morning.
I just wanted to point out that you like to bash the Liberal Party and you like to put Joe Clark down, but I think in your case that every knock is a boost for either one of those two gentlemen.
That may well be, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed. Good morning. I get it coming and going, but
price of popularity, Jack.
Doesn't really matter, yes. My greatest fan at the moment is Sven Robinson. Go ahead, please.
Oh, Mr. Webster?
Yes.
Mr. Lumley. Just a bit of a sidelight here, but I was wondering, can you tell me, Mr. Lumley, was that photographer Cooper, was he included in that tour that they recently went to the Far East?
Cooper. You mean Cooper? He used to take pictures for the PM.
Yes. He's his personal photographer. He doesn't really like the press photographers, so he does his own little biography. He went on when they had the First Ministers' Conference in Italy. That was the first time I became aware of him. And I think I saw him in one of the pictures. Now, secondly, how can they justify taking along the son and I assume a nanny and all the attendant expenses? Was this not a business trip to try and sell some products and get things going, or was this a semi-joyride?
Well, first of all, let me answer Cooper. Cooper is a perfectly proper staff photographer. I think that's his name on the Prime Minister's staff. I have no complaint. Mr. Lumley will tell...
Why do they need a photographer?
Oh, they've got millions of PR men. What's another photographer more a man?
It's more money down the hole, Jack.
Now, that's my opinion on that. Now, Mr. Lumley, and whether or not the Prime Minister should take his family with him on these trips.
And a nanny, probably.
I don't know the probablys. Ask Mr. Lumley. He'll try and answer you, perhaps.
Who babysat him?
Who babysat him?
Yes.
Tom Axworthy. Tom Axworthy was the name of the babysitter. That's Lloyd Axworthy's brother. But he
Who needs him?
Well, okay. What about this joyride?
Well, first of all, Jack, as I said previously, it wasn't a joyride. It was a very arduous trip. When you do 7 countries in the short period of time the Prime Minister
went.
Were you on that
trip?
No, but I've made that trip
Yeah, I know
3 or 4 times, and just take a look at what the press down in those countries focused on. They focused on the father-son relationship. Cultural relationship, family relationship is very important to people in that area, and the fact that Mr. Trudeau is held in such high regard, I think, was very important. His son, and I think it's also very important that he took his son along. Most parents spend a heck of a lot more time with their family just because they have available time.
I have no objection at all if he takes his family with him. He's entitled to have his family with him, and it's good PR.
It doesn't cost any more money.
Except when he's in a private rail car and makes gestures in Salmon Arm. That was the one that we couldn't get along with. We better do another short one with Ed. Program brightened up when the common people came in. After the break. The people from Cornwall have senses of humor too. Go ahead, please.
Yes, to Mr. Lumley. I was wondering what his ministry's plans are for following up to Trudeau's trip, especially considering Canada's rather feeble efforts in pursuing the Pacific Rim market compared to Australia or, well, certainly to the United States. Australia, for example, has trade commissions in major Japanese cities. Canada has nothing like this at all.
Well, first of all, the trade commissions no longer are my responsibility. They're my colleague, Mr. Regan's. But in the past 2.5 years, we've put a substantial effort into the whole Pacific Rim. Jack, you recall when I came out here to chair the Pacific Rim Opportunities Conference in November of 1980. The first 10 countries I visited as a trade minister when we assumed office in 1980 were in the Pacific Rim. And we've sponsored more missions in the past 2.5 years to that part of the world than at any other time in our history. And I agree with the gentleman that there's still a substantial amount more that we can do, but I'm a firm believer that the Pacific Rim holds many opportunities for us, not only in the sale of our resources, but in the high technology areas.
But he said the Australians have got missions in major Japanese city, and he says we don't have one trade mission in Japan?
No, we have, in Tokyo, but I think what he's suggesting is that we don't have consular offices throughout Japan like some other countries
Maybe
do.
we should have.
It's something that be considered.
Thank you, sir. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Mr. Lumley.
Yes.
Saying this, sir, as a voter who voted for the Liberals in 1968, and I'm saying it specific, short, and to the point. Long live practical arithmetic, common sense budgeting, honest men in government, and freedom in Canada under Prime Minister to be Joe Clark. Thank you.
Thank you. Quesnell, BC, go ahead, please.
Yes, Mr. Webster.
Yeah.
I'd like to speak to you and Mr. Lumley, and I just to make a point here on this embargo against lumber in this area. And I'm sure if he was aware of, to the extent that the mills and whatnot are subsidized in this area, that I don't know what's going to happen here if the political situation doesn't change. They're not only subsidizing the mills here, they're effectively destroying
any competition whatsoever from the small businessmen and whatnot in this area.
You're talking about that situation of the auction of lumber and the trucking dispute and the availability of the lumber, yes.
That's right. In fact, the mills aren't only being subsidized now. They're, in essence, they're being paid to take the timber out of the bush here. They're paying no stumpage whatsoever.
I know the story. I'm going to do something about it, but I can't drag the federal trade minister into that one. But thanks for your call, and thanks for nagging me. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, good morning, Mr. Webster, Mr. Lumley.
Yes.
Good morning.
Hello?
Yes?
Yeah, a question for Mr. Lumley. I spent a number of years working and living and traveling around Southeast Asia, and what I found was, for example, in the Philippines, a person asked me where they could buy some Canadian salmon canned, and also they inquired about canned sardines. So I suggested, okay, we will go to the Canadian consul there, embassy, and see if we can get any information. And what I found was we could get lots of information on how to immigrate to Canada, but nobody there seemed to know who to get in touch with in Canada to buy something. I have found the same situation all over, that we have immigration offices surrounding the world, but no information on how to buy something from Canada. What's the policy in our trade missions?
Well, I don't know when you're in the Philippines, sir, but I know Ambassador Ed Babinski is a former trade commissioner. He's been there for the last 2.5 years, and that's one of our most aggressive trade missions around the world. And I don't know when exactly was you had the information.
How long ago?
About 2.5, 3 years ago.
Thank you, sir. It's a valid point. And I would really like you to read the Auditor General's report on the immigration scandal, scams, illegalities, wholesale networks, sir. It'll make your hair curl.
At least you can't say it'll make it go gray, Jack.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that to the man from Glad. I had to use that. Next guy. 7, go ahead, please.
Hello, Mr. Lumley?
Yes, sir.
Yes, I have 2 questions to ask you. One deals with the car content law. And Australia's biggest customer is Japan, and yet they have a domestic car content law of 90%. How come Canada, Japan is only our second largest traded customer, and we don't have a domestic car content law?
Well, first of all, it's 65% content. Secondly, most of the tariffs that Australia has are not bound in the GATT. Now, that sounds very confusing, but GATT is an international agreement of tariffs and trade. And if you change something in the GATT, you could pay a price. In other words, the other country could ask you for something you may not want. Most of our tariffs are bound in the GATT. So if we change any of that, if we all of a sudden put a 95% domestic content law in, then we'll have to compensate whatever country asks. For example, they could ask it in forest products, they could ask for it in the shoes, they could ask for whatever category they want. Australia doesn't have that particular problem.
So we made a mistake in being bound by GATT?
No, I don't think so, Jack. I'd much prefer our state of economy than Australia's. I think in the long term it will turn out to be the best.
Go ahead from Victoria.
Good morning, Jack.
Morning.
Mr. Lumley.
Yes.
Just a question, sir. Do you believe that under a new leader such as Mr. Turner or Mr. Johnson, that the higher echelon in the Liberal Party, such as the cabinet, the higher echelon cabinet ministers, would they still be French people? Could I hang up now and listen to your answer, sir?
I'm very happy with the present leadership, sir.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, Mr. Lumley.
Yes, sir.
Will you force the United States market to take metric-sized lumber from Canada?
Well, if I'm not mistaken, most of the United States in the forest products, pulp and paper industry, automotive industry, agriculture is already metric. That's one of the reasons why we've made the change.
We seem to be getting 2 stories here. We're told by many people in the United States that they're not in the metric system, that we're being sold a bill of goods here. Not only that, many Canadians are fed up with the Liberal Party and their metric garbage that they're handing us. We're being dictated by the Liberal government, and that's what's going to put Trudeau out.
Sir, when you have a country that depends almost for 1/3 of its total GNP on what it exports, and the majority of the world, with the exception of the United States, is in metric, I think it's imperative that a country like Canada starts to adopt that, particularly if you want to diversify those markets. Here in British Columbia, for example, you want to diversify those markets in the Pacific Rim, and they're almost all metric. But if I'm not mistaken, about 90% of the major U.S. export industries, such as the pulp and paper and lumber industry, is in metric themselves, because if they want to sell abroad.
Yeah, that's confused me too, and we'll find out for a fair question next week how much of our exports to the United States go in metric, because I think the Japanese market and many other markets are totally metric, which is why a lot of these mills are still going. Mm-hmm. But I just don't know that, and I'll find out. Okay, you're not dropping off from Winnipeg on your way home.
No, Jack, I think I'll just fly over and wave.
My thanks to Ed Lumley, Minister of Trade. Give me the full title again.
Industry, Trade and Commerce and Regional Economic Development.
And I'll be back with the cruise missile man, the cruise missile, anti-cruise missile man after the break. The storm of protest about the deployment, not deployment, about the testing of cruise missiles over Canadian territory has grown quite considerably in the last 18 months to 2 years. And as I see it, there are three forms of protest. One is the normal, peaceful, political protest. And then there's those who indulge in minor disobedience, such as tramping in and out of the House of Commons when it's in session, making little speeches and getting chucked out in their ears. And then, of course, there's the other one, the violent protest, such as the attack on the Litton factory in Toronto. Here this morning is Ken Hancock of the Cruise Missile Conversion Project. What do you want to convert it to?
Well, in this case, with Litton, it would be quite easy to convert that factory to urban transportation guidance systems. Litton already makes guidance systems for commercial airlines. Mr. Lumley didn't happen to mention that as well we can't afford subsidized housing in this country. His friends gave Litton $50 million to make this kind of military installation.
Just gave them $50 million?
Interest-free loans and grants, $50 million, yes.
Well, we're also getting considerable help from Ontario and other places on the guidance systems for the new ALRT in Vancouver, which of course is a perfectly proper use of the money.
That's right.
But which camp are you in? Are you the violent, the non-violent House of Commons protester, or are you just the ordinary guy who writes a letter?
I don't know what you mean by violent. What do you mean by violent?
Violent means blowing up places, that's what I mean.
Well, I don't think that the Cruise Missile Conversion Project is involved in blowing up places. But I hope I'm not a normal type. I would hope that our politics are a little more upfront than that, a little more risky than that.
So you're in the middle?
No, I don't think I'm in the middle. My house wouldn't have been raided in Toronto last month if I was in the middle.
Why was your house raided in Toronto?
By the police, because they're trying to harass us. Because they say, and they know that it's not true, that we're connected to the bombing. It's a form of harassment that goes on.
How many of you were raided by, was it the RCMP or the Metro Police?
It was, in this case, it was Metro Police Security Squad who were involved in heading up the investigation in the Toronto area in the bombing. There was 3 offices in Ontario, 2 in Toronto, and 2 homes raided.
Your home was raided?
Yes.
What did they get from your home?
They got a lot of my personal documents and a lot of the work that I'm doing.
And did they have a warrant to do the search?
They have a warrant. They call that legal. I don't call it legal just because they have a warrant.
But they did have a warrant?
They had a warrant, yeah.
Did this result in any charges against you at all?
No, which of course tends to undermine our belief that the whole thing was a facade.
Or maybe they were looking at evidence in connection with other events.
What they're trying to do is disrupt people's democratic right to dissent in this country. That's what they're trying to do.
I know a number of mass murderers whose rights to dissent by killing people have been disrupted in the first instance by the police coming along with a warrant which says Judge so-and-so allows you on reasonable suspicion to go look for such. Did you bring the...
Well, but I mean, that's ridiculous. We're not mass murderers. What do you use that example
No, that's not the point I'm making. I'm merely saying, did you bring the warrant with you? I would like, as a reporter, to see...
We're not allowed to have them. That's another thing we're not allowed to do.
Reasonable and proper cause. You can see that warrant.
Oh, yeah, we saw it. You know, I've seen it.
And you could have got a copy of it.
It was a bunch of nonsense what I saw on it.
You should have demanded a copy, gone down there and got a photo. You had lawyers. They had a copy of the warrant.
Yeah, and I've seen it, and I think it's nonsense.
All right, what was the reasonable, and I'm interested, I'm not harassing you. I want to know what the police said for the reasonable and probable cause that you might be committing some kind of offense.
Okay.
What offense were they after?
Can I give you a bit of chronology of what happened in Toronto?
Sure.
Okay. On December, was it 17th, the Cruise Missile Conversion Project was raided by the police. That day, simultaneously, my house was visited by the police, demanding that I answer questions about the bombing.
Right.
Now, at that time, when the police left my home, they said they would be back with a warrant the next day. Mm-hmm. They told the JP in Toronto that the reason they thought they should have a warrant for my house was related to information they found in the cruise office that related me to the bombing. They left my house before they got that information from the cruise office. And yet they turn around and tell the GP that it was that information which legitimized the raid. I thought that's a little suspicious.
You would suggest the warrant was wrongly and weakly obtained?
I would suspect that there is a right to have some doubts in this case, yes.
Fair enough. Let me think now. And obviously you have not been charged with anything, so that they found nothing to implicate you in anything.
No, they keep warning us through the press that they're going to arrest us, but they've been mouthing off like that for about 6 weeks now. So I think the Metro Police should put up or shut up, basically.
Oh, I would agree with you on that. Cruise Missile Conversion Project encompasses a number of bodies, right?
Number of people, yes.
A number of groups?
Number of different collectives, working collectives, yeah.
Coalition for World Disarmament?
No, that's not in the cruise. These people, I think, are the local people who brought me in to speak in Vancouver.
Oh, Vancouver branch of the United Nations Association. All right, what do you suggest? No, he does not. You're not in favor. Are you in favor of violent action against the cruise?
I'm not in favor of violence, which is why I want the cruise to stop in the first place.
No, that's not the question I asked you. Please, are you in favor of violent action by your protagonists, your supporters?
Well, read what it says about us, Jack. Obviously, we're not committed to violence, or we agree with it. We practice politics, which assumes non-injury to human life.
Why didn't you lead that protest in the House of Commons? I saw 30 or 40 being ejected the other night.
Well, I was in Calgary at that time, but I knew it was going to happen.
You knew it was going to happen. What do you want people to do?
Well, I think what I would like
I'm not
people
in favor
to do
of the cruise missile as a first strike weapon deployed in Europe. Scares me witless. But what do you want people to do?
Well, let's take it step by step. First of all, we need a mass campaign of education in this country. Mr. Lumley and his cohorts have decided two things which cuts out the democratic process. One is they're not going to sign a treaty, because to sign a treaty they'd have to bring it before the House of Commons. They want to sign an agreement. Secondly, Alan McKechnie has said we don't have the right to know what's in this agreement till after it's signed. Democratic process has been shut off. So it's up to us, a mass campaign of education. Secondly, I think there's a mass campaign of nonviolent action required in this country. Massive campaign of non-consent, non-cooperation.
A la Gandhi.
A la Gandhi, right.
He happens to be topical at this particular moment.
That's right.
What else?
What else? Oh, I think that's a good start right there.
Wait, just a minute.
I think only that will stop this missile system in this country. These men are not committed to stopping it. We have to stop it.
No, we're a tale of the American dog, as you and I each realize very bluntly and brutally.
That's right.
And we know perfectly well that there was a story out of Toronto the other day, and out of Ottawa, that the agreement was not going to be signed. We checked yesterday.
Yes.
And that was a New York Times story.
That's right.
And they have not changed the position, and they will sign what you say is an agreement.
Yes.
If it was a treaty, we would know about it beforehand, would we?
If it is a treaty, it would have to be brought before the House for full debate, which would, of course, open up the process to the possibility of public scrutiny, which, of course, we are told we do not have the right to do in this case. So there's no accident that's an agreement.
Mind you, you're not able, or rather your movement is not able to produce the mass opposition in the streets that is much more easily done in Germany or France and Britain.
Not at this point, but let's talk about that for a second. We have a situation in which, as I said, we have not been allowed as people to know the information, and yet Gallup polls indicate last week 52% of people in this country do not want this missile. I think that's a lot of pretty good work on the part of the movement.
Oh, I don't want to tell you. But on the other hand, I think, it's the Americans. They can test it. They're not going to have warheads here.
Well, so what? I mean, that's splitting hairs, isn't it? I mean, to me, it's like saying we're going to...
Listen, where were all you liberals during the Vietnam?
I'm not a liberal.
Well, small L liberal.
I'm not a small or large L liberal.
Are you an anarchist then?
No. I'm a socialist, okay?
All right, where were all you people when we were desperate for all the side work in the Vietnam War, 350 or 550 million a year, which we supplied in munitions to the Americans, and nobody objected.
That's nonsense. I was there at Dow Chemical in Toronto protesting about that. Napalm.
Oh, you're a professional protester?
Well, no, I'm a experienced one.
How old are you, 35?
34.
How long have you been protesting?
15 years, 16 years now.
Boy and man and protester. Tell him what you think of him, and if he's right or wrong or crazy or whatever. Please, now. Am I taking 1244? Yeah. Go ahead, Ken Hancock of the Cruise Missile Conversion Project. Go ahead. Where is he?
Hello.
That's you, ma'am.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Claire Perry. I represent End the Arms Race, which is the coalition of over 100 organizations, Jack, that put on the April 24th Walk for Peace last year and is planning another one with more organizations this year for April 23rd, a very peaceful expression of opposition to the danger of nuclear war and specifically opposition to Canadian participation in the escalation of the arms race through the testing of the cruise missile in Canada. And I want to make very clear on your program that End the Arms Race thoroughly opposes bombing of Litton Industries and would oppose the bombing of any place, anytime, from the use of crews to the use of any kind of missiles in war to individual expressions of frustration and discontent like the bombing of Litton. We want it clearly understood that in no way does the mainstream peace organizations in Vancouver, in British Columbia, support this kind of action.
Okay, ma'am, she's not a friend of yours, Ken, is she?
I don't think she's not a friend of mine.
Well, that's the object of your exercise is to disassociate yourself from this cruise missile conversion project, correct?
I think that we are in sympathy with the idea of converting Litton Industry into a peaceful production unit. And, for example, we agree that it's fact that jobs created by the use of dollars for production in peaceful, useful consumption industries such as retail, trade, education, hospitals, etc.
Thank you, ma'am. She got her message across.
I think so.
Go ahead, please.
Mr. Hancock?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm so sick and tired of you people. You're so naive. It's incredible. You guys keep going after everybody who's here at home. Never go after the Soviets. And for another thing, I mean, what do you think? There's going to be some sort of divine intervention if war breaks out that Canada's going to be excluded because the cruise missile wasn't tested here?
Can I give you a little facts about life? I think the naivety probably rests with yourself, actually.
This camera here. No, but he made a good point.
He didn't make a good point. The facts of life are that the American government has publicly declared its commitment to first-strike nuclear weapons policy. So you're the one who's living in the naive world, not me.
Well, who's telling the Soviets that they're not after a first-strike capability? You're certainly not doing it.
You don't have the right to...
You're backing them.
You don't have the right to tell the Soviets anything as long as you're supporting nuclear weapons policies yourself.
I'm not supporting nuclear weapons policies. I'm supporting the fact that if it's not a balanced policy, it's no policy at all. And once the Soviets have more than a 50% advantage, you better look out because you're going to be speaking Russian, son.
Oh, I am? Am I? Well, I would say that we're not going to be speaking anything.
The fact remains, however, you can't trust the Soviet Union any more or any less than you can trust any specific administration in the United States.
Okay, but that's not our only choice, Jack.
No, but the man's right about the fact that if we unilaterally disarmed, the face of the world would change rather quickly. Don't you agree?
I don't agree.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'd just like to tell the gentleman that I might not agree with everything he says, but I agree basically with what he's going for, which is disarmament or whatever you want. That's what he's basically going towards. And if we don't have more people like this guy, I'd say that to the last gentleman, like he said, we're not going to be talking anything. It'll be overkill.
Okay, Boyd, thanks very much.
Hello?
From Victoria, go ahead, please.
Hi, I've been studying the arms race for about 15 years, and my position is that with all the trillions of dollars being spent on nuclear weapons, that there's not enough done in negotiations between the superpowers to stop the arms race, and it's a very simple, logical fact that in order to stop it, you have to have human negotiations and not the build-up of weapons. I think that Mr. Hancock's position is quite correct, and that's the only solution that's going to work, a negotiated political solution.
Thank you, sir. Another friend.
I don't think that the governments are going to be the agents of disarmament. It's going to be us who's going to do it. We're going to be the people who are going to change it around.
Well,
I don't. You just said don't trust them, and I don't trust them. It's us I trust.
Wish I had your faith. Go ahead, please. Go ahead, please.
Hello. Yes, I'd like to just say that I agree with everything the man has to say. That they should test their missile on somebody else's property if that's what they want to do. I don't think it should have anything to do with us.
In other words, we've got no commitments under North American defense, no commitments under NATO, no commitments under the Atlantic Alliance. Canada should cop out altogether, right?
Well, we're going to be dragged into it whether we like it or not,
That's
but I
the
think
point.
they should test it on their own property.
Jack, I think you're more intelligent than you're indicating. I don't think that you can equate defense with nuclear weapons policy. You are feeding that illusion. This isn't going to defend us. This stuff is going to kill us. It doesn't defend us.
Go ahead from Victoria.
Hello, Jack.
Yeah.
I just want to let you know that I am personally not a warmonger. However, with the attitude of your guest there, I feel that if we don't prepare ourselves in some way, regardless whether it's conventional or atomic, we're just going to become another Poland. And I think that when you look at history, Germany walked in there. They say the Russians didn't walk in there. However, they were standing by. Blah blah blah. And that's all these people are going to get for us. If I bopped him in the nose, he'd turn around and bop me. You can count on it.
But he wouldn't annihilate you with a nuclear weapon. That's his point.
I beg your pardon?
He would not annihilate you with a nuclear weapon all the rest of mankind. That's his point, is it not?
Yeah, you're right in that regard. However, I doubt very much that that'll ever happen.
Okay, sir. Mind you, you'd much rather have us prepared to go back to an old, gruesome Hitler-type war, which was a necessary war.
Oh, Jack, that's not the choice. That's not the choice.
I'm only pulling your legs. But I'm making the point that the Hitler war was a necessary war, or there would have been no freedom on the face of this earth today.
Jack, Einstein said that since the bomb, everything we talk about, think about, has changed except the way we think about war. You can't talk about the Second World War and equate it to the bomb. That thinking has got to stop and change.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, two questions. One to your guest, are you just a plain communist? And if you think that your movement is so popular, why don't you try to get yourself elected by the people of Canada and work within the system that those taxpayers like myself have tried to create? Work within the system instead of doing whatever you're doing on the fringes. If you're so popular, put your name on the ballot. Let's see where you stand.
Well, I would hope that if I'm a communist, I'm not a plain one. I'm a more exciting one than a plain one. I don't think it's relevant whether I'm a communist or not, and I don't think the system is open to change. I think it's shut down. I've been trying to say that to you this morning, is that the Liberal government in this case has shut down the democratic process for the people in this country. So it is up to us to create other kinds of democratic process, which is nonviolent direct action.
What about your second question? A perfectly good question, an excellent question. Here are you, a man of some considerable intelligence and personality, a little bit of charm, not too much.
I try to keep it down.
Why don't you run for public office, or is it merely your intention that you have no way of attempting to change this from within? You want to destroy the system?
I don't want to be libelous, but I think we've just had an example of what happens to people when they run for public office.
You mean Lumley?
Yeah. The guy doesn't believe anything. He doesn't take a stand. I don't want to end up like that.
But
I'm happy organizing the way I organize.
Do you want to run for a political party, take over the government, and change our policies vis-a-vis the U.S.?
It's not the only process of change to take over the government. No, I don't want to run for office.
What do you want to do?
I don't want to end up living a boring life where I can't say anything.
You just want to sit in the some kind of exciting kind of communist that you describe yourself.
Well, hopefully not a dull one, anyway.
What is an exciting communist? A CPCL, Marxist-Leninist, what?
I don't think it's relevant whether I'm a communist or not.
Well,
what I'm saying is I don't believe that that is the process for change.
I ain't no witch
You
hunter.
talked to me when we were off the air, and you said you don't believe what these guys tell you. So
No.
what are you haranguing me now about? We're not running for office.
It is relevant what
You don't believe in it either.
I don't believe in anything.
You should be backing me, not
No, I
this.
shouldn't. I might back you if I knew what your plans were and what you really are. I've no idea who you are.
We're open. You can read about our
No,
stuff.
but
We're
you
not
won't
like
even,
the Liberal
You
government.
won't
We
even
don't
tell me
keep
what
it
your
hidden.
political philosophy is.
I told you, I'm a socialist, okay?
No. What kind of socialist? I've done it so many times it's boring. What kind of socialist?
What kind are there?
Well, the socialists like Ed Broadbent.
Oh, no.
All right. And then we have a very famous socialist here called Harry Rankin.
Uh-huh.
You're not like Harry Rankin.
No.
And then there's Mao. He's a socialist.
Right.
And then there's a new Russian. What's his name? Ashparov. Andropov. He's a socialist. Are you any one of these kinds of socialists?
No, I'm not.
What kind of socialist? You'd wait till after that.
I don't believe in that kind of power structure.
You just believe in destroying our power structure.
Oh, come on, Jack. This man who was sitting here before is the man who believes in destroying things. Why didn't you ask him about the cruise? Why didn't you ask him his position?
Matter of fact, I was going to do it with you anyway. Do I want to bore everybody to death all the time? I do my best. You're very bright. Thank you very much. I wish you luck within certain limits, providing you'll tell me what your long-run political aims are.
Okay. Well, maybe sometime we will do that.
Thanks very much.
Okay.
After the break. Sex is something not to be spoken about, not to be talked about, not to be discussed, least of all in church.
That's definitely the view that we've been seen with, that's for sure, and the position that has come out from our community.
But we're trying to change that.
What way are you trying to change it?
In the churches.
We do that with seminars where we have couples come and we take them through 10 hours of kind of opening their eyes, we hope, in all areas, physically, looking at it from what the scriptures have to say about sex, and bringing them the latest research in sexual behavior.
In sexual behavior, but entirely within the bounds of the, would you say Christian, or are you a specific evangelical type of Christian group?
Well, we ourselves are evangelical, but we work in a broad range of churches, Catholic and the whole range of Protestant churches.
I'm sure there are 30 or 40 churches in British Columbia, West Coast, and maybe 150 congregations who would be appalled if you came along to suggest that you give them seminars on sexual fulfillment. Have you not found rather a rugged reaction from the old line churches?
Well, what's interesting is there's usually a lot of hesitancy at the idea, the way you're saying. But once we get involved with that community, there's a lot of comfort with it. And I think it's because we're not coming with some radical or liberal viewpoint. We're just coming to say, hey, the Bible isn't negative about sex. We have taken that position because the Bible does have some guidelines against where sexual behavior is practiced. But within sex within marriage, it's very positive, and that's what we're promoting.
And you're promoting also, I presume, contraception?
We don't promote, we leave that up to people's choice. We're not against contraception, but it's
really
not
isn't
something
an
that we
issue.
push.
That is not an issue at all?
No.
And are you promoting sexual education from a young age, as seems to be the current philosophy of some very permissive groups?
Well, you see, it's our view that the best way is to educate the parents, and that's what we focus on. And when the parents are well educated about sexuality and feel good about their own sexuality, then they're going to do a good job of communicating that to their kids.
What are the biggest difficulties you come across in communicating with couples? For instance, what kind of response? I notice that one of these days you're going to have a seminar at the Tent Alliance Church. I'm sure that's a Broadway Tabernacle. Broadway? No, maybe it isn't. Anyway, it's the Tent Alliance Church. I wouldn't have imagined in my life that they would invite a couple of Christian sex manual therapists to speak here.
Well,
it's a new era.
and they do, and the reason they feel comfortable with it is because of our background and our credentials. They don't see us as freaky, kind of coming off the walls. We're straight, we're trained, we function as sex therapists in our practice, and because we come from a Christian perspective and don't promote anything that's weird or unusual, while it's a little difficult to get used to the idea, they are getting used to it because there are so many marriages in trouble.
So therefore you're basically, apart from your clinical sexual advice, is that correct? You're the Kinseys of the evangelical church. Is that the kind of proper comparison?
That might be a way to put it, or the Masters and Johnson of the evangelical church.
Of the evangelical church. Right. Have you started this particular form of evangelism recently?
We've been at it for about 8 years. It took a while till we got ourselves well trained and did a lot of seminars around the country, wrote the book, and all that kind of thing.
In fact, the book grew out of our teaching the seminars. We found that in teaching the seminars, it was surprising to us the change that could happen in couples' lives as a result of education.
There's something that I think we're leaving out here, and that is in about 75% of the homes, there isn't sexual satisfaction. Whether you're talking evangelical Christian, broad range Christian, or just any home, America or Canada. And so we're touching a need that is very basic that hasn't been addressed in times past.
All right, how do you select your audiences for these Christian guides to the gift of sex in the churches? What age groups do you deal with?
We normally have people who are married who come, so that's the focus for us.
You don't give counseling to younger people within the church. You leave that to the church and the families.
Our particular focus has mainly been to leave that to the families, although we have gotten involved in sex education in our own community and in colleges. We do seminars on college campuses as well.
Because, you know, the screams against sex education used to come from all of the kind of, using the word loosely, right-wing religious groups, you might say. They were the ones who object to sex education in school, they object to sex films in school, they objected in hysterical fashion, still do around here, to almost any form of sexuality being taught in the schools. And you oppose that attitude.
We oppose that attitude, that's correct.
We oppose the objection.
Yeah.
We believe that there is some sex education going on that is not necessarily good and helpful, but to just be opposing sex education feels like it is neglecting a very important issue. We would much rather say what we are for rather than what we are against.
And what we're for is to communicate attitudes that the sexual part of us is a very positive, wholesome part of us. And if we don't communicate that to our kids, then they get preoccupied with all kinds of other things.
You're not holding any seminars this time round?
No, we're going to be here on the 15th and 16th of April.
Well, I wish you well, and I thank you for coming in this morning.
Thank you.
It kind of opened my eyes a little bit. I never thought churches got involved in sexual fulfillment.
Well, we do.
Do you ever get thrown out of a church?
Never have.
No, in fact, they always invite us. So it's their idea, and we respond to their invitation.
Good, and I'm very much obliged. Next, I'd forgotten, I've got to do this thing this morning on, what is it? Post office at Chase. Stay here in case some calls come in for you. But there is one piece of business I promised to do for an upcountry alderman this morning. So the Penners will be with me, and I'll try and do this Chase thing right now, after the break. I'm speaking with Tom Atkinson, isn't it?
That's right.
Alderman in Chase, BC, and you phoned me earlier this morning to complain about some particularly, it seems, stupid plan of Canada Post involving your old age pensioners. Tell me it.
That's right. Well, the unknown to Village Council, they've planned on moving the post office. They haven't written to Council asking any advice as to what the population is and where they might move to and stuff. Anyhow, since I talked to you this morning, I phoned the village office and got some from the 1981 census, and we have 550 people in Chase.
Right.
Out of 1,700 who are over 55 years old.
1,700? No, 170.
So there are 1,700 people living in Chase, and 550 of them are over 55 years old.
I've got that.
Okay, they're moving the post office, or they're planning on moving the post office from the immediate downtown area, close to the banks, the stores, all of the facilities that we have, and they're moving it out to a shopping center which is out, more than 1 kilometer from the downtown core. A few years ago, they built a senior citizens complex right in downtown, so it was close to the post office, so that it was close to the stores, the amenities,
I've got the picture. I've got the picture, Mr. Atkinson. You have a senior citizens housing project in downtown Chase. Post office is close by. You suddenly learned last night that the post office is going to be moved to Chase Plaza, more than 1 kilometer away.
That's right.
And these people, if they don't have cars, as many don't, and there's no sidewalk on the road, and you have very bad weather, and they're going to have to walk 1 kilometer or more in the rain and the snow on the highway, away out to Chase Plaza to pick up their mail. Is that right?
That's right.
Did the post office tell you about this in advance?
No, they didn't. We still haven't heard from the post office. Maybe there's a letter in the mail, I'm sure.
Well, just a minute. Your information is that they have signed a lease and they're going to move the post office.
No, our information is that the lease is prepared and has been authorized by the Public Works Department, but it's not yet signed.
But when do you think they're going to move the old age pensioners post office out to Chase Plaza?
Well, I can only guess. I really don't know.
Well, hold on. I'll see if I can tell you.
Okay.
Hold on. You listen on the line while I talk to somebody from the post office. Is that you, Fred? Hello, Fred. Oh, just a minute. That's the wrong one. Is that you, Fred?
Yeah, here I am.
Fred, what are you doing at Chase, making these old age pensioners walk up the Transcanada Highway, no sidewalk, to a post office away up the road?
Well, what we're looking at are some alternative sites where we can relocate the post office. The present building has outgrown its capacity. So we have to find somewhere else where we can locate the post office. One of the alternatives is the new plaza, which would give us the space that we need, which would give us the access for our trucks and a variety of other things. But talking to our facilities people this morning, there is no plan yet, no definite plan to go in there.
No decision has yet been made.
No, it looks attractive, but it is not a final decision has been made on it.
Perhaps someone hadn't realized that a lot of these old folk have to walk up the road with no sidewalk in the snow and the rain in the winter, which is fierce in Chase. Eh?
Well, we also have to look at the fact that we have to have space where we can put the boxes in, put the counters in, put the sortation facilities in, get the semi-trailer trucks in and out, and all that sort of
Oh, no, I agree with you on that, obviously. But Mr. Atkinson, the alderman, seems to be concerned that the council was not in any way consulted yet.
Well, I don't know about council. I think we've been talking to people in the village, in the village administration, because one of the sites that was offered to us was some village-owned property.
Hold on a second. I don't
Jack?
yeah, that's you, Tom.
Absolute nonsense. They have never talked to any of our administration at all. In fact, they own 2 pieces of property right next to the post office, vacant property. The federal government already own it. They have never contacted the village office at all, or any of the administration.
Okay, Tom, the good news is they haven't signed the lease, they haven't made a decision. Let's see if I can get Fred of the post office to get one of his people to come and see you. What's the name of the mayor of Chase?
Ivor Humphreys.
Ivor Humphreys, hold on. How about going up to see Mr. Atkinson and Mr. Humphreys, Fred?
Well, I'll talk to our facilities guys and see what they've been up to, but...
Anyway, at the moment, no decision, no move, no need for panic. Is that right?
Not right now, no.
Thanks, Fred. Much obliged. Did you hear that, Tom?
Yes, I did. Thanks very much, Jack. Really appreciate it.
No, small things are achieved in a matter of moments, but make sure you nag them and that they come up and see you.
Good. Thanks a lot.
Let me know what happens.
I sure will.
Bye. Quite interesting. Any calls? Go ahead, please. Hello?
Hello.
Yes, ma'am.
Good morning. I'm for what these people are doing with the young couples.
Thank you for that.
That's a Dr. Penner and Nurse Penner, right?
Right. I can't hear you very well.
No, I think it's your bad line. It's a bad line indeed. But you think that this project is a good thing, even for the churches to get into, do you?
I'm Catholic, and I think it's great.
Oh,
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Go ahead, please. Hello. Go ahead, please. We didn't have time to line up the calls properly, which is part of my particular problem.
Hello, Webster?
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'd like to say thank you very much for putting that couple on. I think they're doing a terrific job with what they're doing, because with all these groups around nowadays saying that sex is dirty and everything else, that this couple's finally come and told us that it's a normal, proper, healthy attitude to have.
Have you met the Penners before?
No, I haven't.
Well, we're glad that you're there responding. We feel very strongly about the way you're talking about it.
Oh, thank you very much, because I'm so sick and tired of hearing all this garbage in the news lately.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. What do you, as practicing Christians involved in sexual fulfillment, feel about all these pay TV movies and all this porn on the television, soft porn or eroticism? What do you feel about it? Is it a help to people?
It may help them a little bit, some people, but we feel that it mainly presents a negative attitude about sexuality. It doesn't usually build a relationship in a marriage. It doesn't provide good sex education for kids. And so that's why we're out giving an alternative to that.
And it's basically denigrating the women, is it not?
Very much.
It is, and it promotes this whole idea that sex is associated with sin and dirty and bad and the whole negative view.
Go ahead, please. Hello.
Yes?
That's you?
That's me. Oh, I was wondering if this Mr. and Mrs. Penner also are related in any way to Jack Penner on Rocky Ridge, California?
Not that we're aware of.
Okay, ma'am, and then I must leave it. My thanks to the Penners for coming in this morning. I wish you well. And I'll be back after the break. Instead of going to the movie Gandhi last night, I slipped up and met Sir Richard Attenborough in the Four Seasons. Found him to be a delightful guy, and this is just a little tease from the interview you'll see next week with Sir Dickie.
I went to every major American distributor, every major British distributor, and they all said, who the hell wants to see a film about a little brown man dressed in a sheet carrying a beanpole? We know nothing about him, he has no interest for the public, and you're wasting your time. Nobody will put the money up, and even if you ever make the film, nobody will ever go and see it.
Well, it took Sir Dickie 20 years to get that film on the go, cost $18 million, and it looks like it's going to be the worldwide hit of this particular year. I'll play the Attenborough interview in full. I don't know which morning next week, but I'll let you know. It really is a delightful interview, I think, anyway. Oh, Monday, Archbishop Scott, the primate of the Anglican Church in Canada, and pay TV and porn and prices at 9 a.m. precisely. And you're going to change the procedures at the border so that your immigration officers have a better chance to question and spot the many illegal immigrants now in the country.
Yes.
Oh, what way?
Well, that's what Mr. Robinson is presently looking at, advising me on, and as soon as we get the recommendations, we'll implement them.
We won't have any more psychiatrists getting in the snit over the way, as happened before, over the way the Maples is run now.
We sure hope that will not happen.
Is that right, Dr. Reeves?
We hope not.
The students are crossing our picket lines. Virtually all the faculty members are crossing our picket lines, and that has to stop. And so we're going to have to do a number of things. I think we'll probably start some mass picketing.
Why don't you quit smoking?
Before we're on the air, you're nagging at me already.
No, I'm just asking you.
What were you asking me?
I thought you quit smoking.
So I have. I just have the odd wee drag. Yes, it has. Uh-huh. Oh, I'm very much obliged. Trade Minister, cruise missiles and sex on check at midnight. Pay TV, prices and the porn aspect on Webster Monday.